In this video, you'll learn about the basics of machine quilting, both straight line and free motion. And you'll get some ideas for quilting this quilt that was featured in the previous video in this series. Gather your supplies. You'll need a walking foot for straight line quilting, a darning foot for free motion quilting. You want safety pins for pinning the top together, thread and bobbins all ready to go, as machine quilting takes lots of thread. If you don't want your quilting stitches to stand out, then buy a matching thread. Or you might want to try invisible thread. Make sure you stay away from this quilting thread. It's much thicker than this regular thread, and it's used for hand quilting, not machine. You can buy machine quilting thread, but it's not necessary. With machine quilting, sometimes it's difficult to hold on to your project. Many quilters wear gloves with rubber grips to help hold the quilt in place. For me, I think the gloves are too cumbersome. Instead, I use these finger grips, and I usually only use a few of them to help hold that fabric in place when quilting. You'll find less shifting between layers when using cotton bat, and you usually don't have to quilt so close together. On this batting, your quilting can be up to 10 inches apart. You'll also want as much space as possible around your machine to help carry the weight of the quilt. Press your top and backing before layering your quilt. Place your back face down and tape it to the table to keep it taut. Next, lay out your batting and then your top. You can see that I cut my batting and backing a few inches larger than the top to make it easier to hold onto when I'm quilting along the edges. I'll be using safety pins to keep all the layers together. Start in the center and work your way out. I'll pin about every 3 inches. If you're working on a nice table, you'll want to put a protective mat down first to keep your table safe. When pinning, I start to think about what type of quilting I'll be adding. Straight lines in the border and free motion in the center. Or you could straight line quilt in the center. You could use vertical or horizontal lines or diagonal lines. First, we'll look at straight line quilting. It involves mainly straight lines and gentle curves. You'll need a walking foot attachment for best results. Some machines have these built in. The walking foot has this arm that usually fits over a screw that's on the shank. These feet on the bottom work in unison with your feed dogs to feed the layers through your machine. You'll find this easy to use, as it's just like regular machine stitching. However, you probably do have to adjust the tension on your machine for that extra batting layer. To practice, you can make a little quilt sandwich from leftover scraps. Safety pin the layers together and stitch. I just use my hands when straight line quilting, but many folks prefer to use gloves. Get in the habit of pulling up your threads before you get started. Put your needle down, pull it up, and then pull your thread. Hold on to both of those threads and begin stitching, starting with a regular stitch length, but I like to use a longer stitch length as I find that I get less puckering problems, especially on the back. Hold on and begin stitching. If you want to make a sharp turn, put your needle down, lift up the pressure foot, pivot, and begin stitching. You're ready to quilt your top. Plan out your quilting to avoid starts and stops. For example, I notice that if I start right here, come all the way down, pivot, and continue in that manner all the way around the quilt, I'll end up back here. At that point, I can pivot and begin machine quilting in this direction. And I'll go all the way around the quilt, ending up right there. So you only have one start and one stop. I'll be quilting in this seam line, also known as quilting in the ditch. To get started, I want to bring up my threads. So I've got the bobbin thread and the top thread. I want my needle to go down in this flat side of the seam. which I call the valley, and up here is the hill. So when I stitch, I want my thread to end up on this side of the seam. Hold on to these, make a few stitches forward, reverse a few to lock it. I'm not going real fast, I'm slowing down. I keep my hands around the walking foot, sort of like an embroidery hoop. Notice that the weight of this quilt is pulling, and so I'll pick up this quilt and put it on my table, and now I'm ready to quilt. Oh, this safety pin, if there's safety pins that look like they might be in the way, take them out before you get there and quilt. Move your hands as you move forward. When I get to the corner, I want my needle down, I'll pivot, and I'll continue quilting. I've gone all the way around. I'm coming to the place I started. Before I get to this spot, I want to clip those. Come in, stop, lift up my pressure foot. Now I'm ready to quilt the other side all the way around. Before you switch over to the darning foot, stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around the quilt. This helps to keep the fabric in place. Free motion quilting is used to quilt these tight curves with the darning foot. Most machines come with this darning foot. When using this foot, your feed dogs have to be disabled so you can get control of the stitches. On my machine, I just turn a lever for them to go down. You have to look in your manual to see how your feed dogs are disabled. Learning to free motion quilt involves a lot of practice. You control the stitch length by how fast you move the fabric and by how much you step on the gas. Try layering 4 to 5 paper towels together to try out this technique. You want to pull up your thread, hold on to both threads, lower your feed dogs. Lock your stitches by sewing a couple times in the same spot. Put your needle down, hands around your foot, and continue sewing. Flip these off, get them out of the way. And let me show you how you'll be regulating your stitches. If you sew slow and pull this very fast, you'll get these long stitches. If you sew fast, you go very slow, you'll get these very tight stitches. You'll want to fall somewhere in between. Don't worry about the design that you're making. Just try to get in the habit of moving around. Always have your needle down when you stop. Also, reposition your hands around your foot and move on. Get used to moving the sample in sync with the speed of your machine. As I go faster, I'm moving it faster. The more you practice, the more you'll get used to it. You can try writing your name. Zigzags. How about a star? Practice till you feel comfortable to move on to your quilt. You might like to try out different free motion patterns. I like to make notes to myself to remind me where I might encounter problems. When I go to stitch a quilt, I can use these as reference, or sometimes I just doodle on a piece of paper and I hang it nearby my machine to remind me of the pattern and the spacing I want. Now I'm ready for free motion quilting. My darning foot is attached and I drop my feed dogs. I like to have something on my fingers to help grip the fabric. Oh, hold this in place. And I'm ready to stitch. Get this out of the way. Like before, take out the safety pins and begin. Keep your hands like an embroidery hoop. Stop quilting when you get to the edge of your hoop. Keep the needle down, remove any pins that might get in the way, and begin quilting. It's always easier to come towards you. So to do that, I lift up my pressure foot, move my quilt around so that it's coming towards me, continue stitching. And I'll continue in this manner until the entire quilt's been stitched. At this point I can leave my quilt as is, or I have the option of going in and adding some quilting to these 9 patch blocks. In this quilt I stitched a straight line all the way down through the center, and then I stitched lines from one corner to the other. You could draw lines for that, or you can use tape to mark these lines. You'll quilt right down this line, and after you finish one section you can take this up and use it again for another section. When you're finished with all of your quilting, you'll want to trim these edges off. Cut 4 strips 2 1/4 inches wide. Place 2 strips perpendicular to each other. Put right sides together. Mark the 45-degree angle. Stitch on that line. Press the seam open and then trim the excess on either side. When all 4 strips are sewn together, take one of the ends, line up the 45-degree line on your ruler with that strip, and trim. Put wrong sides together and press. And here's my binding. Before sewing it to your quilt, you might like to add these quilt hangers. If you like this idea, cut 2 6 to 7 inch squares and then fold on the diagonal. Place your piece over one of the top corners on the back, and then stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge to secure it. Bind the edges, and your frame's now ready to feature the quiltinis from this series. In the next video in this series, you'll learn a new method for sewing perfect triangles. Hope you stay tuned. Thanks for visiting LearnHowToQuilt.com. Please like our videos and share them with your friends.